Greetings, I'm Kathryn Bowers. I'm a professor of music at Webster University here in St. Louis, and I'm very pleased to be here to talk to you about a very exciting concert that's coming up on the Basilica series this season. We have a concert in honor of both the 125th anniversary of the birth of the great Hungarian composer Zoltán Kodály and the 40th anniversary of his death. He died in 1967, so it's rather unusual to have both a birth and death anniversary in the same year. We're going to be doing a concert that's going to feature one of, I think, his greatest choral works. It's in some ways a very simple work and in some ways a very complex work, his Missa Brevis. It will be performed by the Webster University Chorale and Choral Society with John Ramirez at the organ. This piece has a subtitle, Tempore Belli, like the Haydn Mass in time of war, because it was at a time of war, World War II to be specific, that Kodály composed this piece. During the war in Budapest, he and his wife were ensconced in the basement of a convent, really, for safety. And the first performance of this work actually followed immediately in 1945 the final siege of Budapest. The performance was heard in the cloakroom of the Opera House in Budapest, performed simply by the opera company's soloists with an accompaniment on harmonium. That was the best they could muster given the situation. Originally, Kodály had conceived this piece as an organ mass, and some organ masses ended up being just music to sort of fill the space of where the movements of a mass would be. To Kodály, it was important that his organ mass actually have some reference to what was taking place in the text of the mass. So the original was for organ, and then he later added the mixed chorus parts and the solo parts. The solo parts in this work are quite stunning. They're not large solos. It is a work in the style of a Missa Brevis, that is a rather brief mass. It's not a mass in the style of Bach's monumental Mass in B minor or Beethoven's Missa Solemnis. It really is a small, I would call it a jewel. It's a really stunning work. Later, in 1948, Kodály also orchestrated the work. And that version actually had its premiere at the 1948 Three Choirs Festival in Worcester Cathedral. So it was premiered in England. But the original was for organ alone with then the soloist and the mixed chorus. And Kodály had actually a couple of extra movements to this mass. He had both an introit and a final ite missa est, which actually has a text, but in our performance, we're going to use the original version, which is for solo organ. I really like the idea personally, and other conductors do also, of having the organ, solo organ pieces be the bookends that come on either side of the mass setting in the middle. The work lasts about between 30 and 35 minutes in its entirety. A well-known musicologist in Hungary who's also involved with the Kodály music education movement is Laszlo Ursa, who described the Missa Brevis as summing up in Kodály's own idiom the whole tradition of European sacred music, from Gregorian plain song through Palestrina and Bach to the great romantics of the 19th century. And Percy Young calls this the least obviously national of Kodály's large-scale works. It was a mass more in the Central European tradition rather than just the Hungarian tradition, which is Budavari Te Deum or his Psalms and Gardas or more, have more Hungarian style to them. The influences, of course, the contrapuntal styles of Bach and earlier Palestrina is also influenced by a piece of Dohnányi's, an earlier late Romantic Hungarian composer. Definitely plain chant style melodies, lots of modal writing in both the chant and the sort of Hungarian folk music influence. There's no real folk music here, but that influence of that style. As well as some Hungarian dance rhythms, some dotted rhythms that are very typical in Hungary that I always refer to as the Scotch snap rhythm. That's where you take a dotted eighth and 16th and you turn it the other way. So you begin with the 16th and then the dotted eighth. So you do the da-da, da-da. That's a very, very basic Hungarian rhythm. A few improvisatory gestures, and here's the term I was looking for before. The kurok fourth figure, which is a Hungarian version of 4/5. And that is what I was looking for when I was discussing, I believe, the Bardos piece, because his little imitative fugal section in Mi Bemol Me is very much based on the fourths. And it's very similar to a little imitative section in the Missa Brevis, which is also based on fourths. There is also some use of drones, and then some very beautiful use also of the parallel thirds and sixths that add a sort of neo-romantic idea to it. I want to just mention a few words here that come out of the Grove Dictionary. This is some of what Bartók had to say about Kodály's music in 1921. Kodály's compositions are characterized in the main by rich melodic invention, a perfect sense of form, a certain predilection for melancholy and uncertainty. And you can hear these elements of melancholy in the Missa Brevis at moments when they are so appropriate to the text. Bartók goes on, he does not seek Dionysian intoxication. He strives for inner contemplation, much as paired with it. His music is not of the kind described nowadays as modern. It has nothing to do with the new atonal, bitonal, and polytonal music. Everything in it is based on the principle of tonal balance. His idiom is nevertheless new. He says things that have never been uttered before and demonstrates thereby that the tonal principle has not lost its raison d'etre as yet. And a few years later, Bartók added, Kodály is a great master of form and possesses a striking individuality. He works in a concentrated fashion and despises any sensation, false brilliance, any extraneous effect. He was a very genuine person, and this comes through, I think, beautifully in his music.